Welcome. I'm Pam Laricchia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with the wonderful Anna Brown. Hi, Anna.
Hey, thank you.
So we are back today with another Unschooling in Context episode. So the idea behind these episodes is to deepen our understanding of unschooling by exploring it in the context of other related things. So this week, I'd like to explore unschooling and how it eventually weaves itself so tightly into the fabric of our lives completely. So we're going to look at what does that look like for us. When we begin unschooling, we soon find ourselves deep in that deschooling territory, right? We question so much of the prevailing wisdom around learning and around parenting and eventually around life in general. And through our journey to unschooling, we really come to see life so differently, don't we?
I feel like it's a doorway to start questioning. If we don't have to send our kids to school, what else have we been told that is a have to that really isn't? So that's that gateway opening up, and gets the wheels turning. I think that's one of the really cool things to watch in people is that wheels start turning because, school is one of those things that you have to go to school. You have to send your kids to school. They turn 4.5 or 5 and off they go on the bus. Like this is just what we all know and believe, right? So when you can first start to question that, I think then it really just the floodgates open up.
Yeah, no, I found that I was thinking back to, to my first years of unschooling, and I was another thought just popped up while you were saying that. My third book is titled "Life Through the Lens of Unschooling." Right? Because so much of it, and it's a collection, an edited collection and reorganization of quite a few of the blog posts that are on my website. And the other interesting piece, so often when I was in that writing phase and writing a lot of posts, as I would go through whatever the issue was, at the end, so often I ended up with like, unschooling is life. And that almost felt like a mantra for me. At the end of each blog post, I'd go through, I'd look at things from various sides through unschooling eyes, and then in the end, I always got to, well, unschooling is life, right? So it is so fascinating how all the stuff that, as you were saying, that you wouldn't think to question or to wonder about, right? All of a sudden, it all opens up once you start to question one big thing. And in our case with unschooling, with a lot of us in it, that one of the first things we question is school and how necessary that is, right? That whole system.
Yep. And I think, something just came to mind when you were saying that. Oh, and I've lost it. but it is that it's that questioning, and I think it really leads to looking at all of these pieces. But I know and that what we're talking about in this episode today is because it's so enmeshed, because unschooling becomes life, sometimes we don't see those nuances of, and we go to, is it the unschooling? And so that's what we'll talk about more if people are kind of wondering, where are you going with this? I think that's really it, because we're kind of explaining, yes, it does enmesh with life. Unschooling is life. And yet, don't get hung up on that when you're looking at, if you're running into conflicts or problems, which we'll kind of discuss later. So I think that's just a really, kind of helps people understand where we're going.
And that perfectly leads into the next question and the little lead in I have for the next question, because the thing is, our exploration of so many of these aspects of life, right, was prompted initially by our move to unschooling. So as you said, they do all get woven together. Right. And then we've widened our perspective on so many different things. But as you were saying, it's really helpful to start putting that into the context of the bigger picture. Because when you're looking back, after the bulk of your deschooling, and I say bulk because, we're always running into new things to question,
Absolutely.
maybe that we haven't come across before, right? That new things are coming up in our lives, and we're going to go through the process of thinking through them. But even when we've done the bulk of it, we truly are a different person, right? And one of my favorite quotes, and I know it's in my What is Unschooling book, it's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's, "The mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions." Many of our thoughts, I love that one, while they were prompted by our journey to unschooling, right? That's what got us starting to question. Our questions and the things we're looking at and considering have grown beyond unschooling. So, as Anna alluded to, we're going to tackle some of the common questions we see in unschooling circles that, in the bigger picture, often aren't really about the unschooling, right? So, a big part of deschooling is changing how we see and engage with our children. So, we see lots of questions around building trusting and respectful relationships, connected, strong relationships with our children. And yet, when all is said and done, is that really about the unschooling? I like to ask myself, even if my kids went to school next week, I suspect that I know I would, most people would still want to cultivate those trusting and respectful relationships with their children because they've come to really appreciate those. So I think that that's one of the things that we're prompted by this because we learn and discover how that's so helpful for unschooling and for our lives in general. But yeah, that's one of those ideas that gets stretched, but doesn't come back in, does it?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I love that quote because I think, and it also helps me when, when you're talking to someone that maybe doesn't quite understand where you're coming from, or you're running into conflicts, and just realizing just by showing a different perspective, their mind is opened in a way, it's stretched to okay, there is this different idea, this other idea. And so I love that quote, but that's a little bit on the side. But,
but yeah, I always think about it when I'm out and about in the world. It's not
right.
about convincing or changing. It's just planting that seed, that little seed that may grow and stretch, and it may not. It may not be for them. It may not be for them in that moment. Maybe it's years later, whatever, right?
But you can't unhear it, yeah. And so then you're making a choice. And that's what we've talked about so often with unschooling, is the beauty of knowing and understanding unschooling is knowing that you have a choice, whatever choice you choose to make.
Yeah. Well, and I think with our relationship with the kids, when we're going through that process of understanding why it's important and building that relationship with our children, and when, like you were saying, when we understand unschooling and why we're doing that, that really ends up being a fundamental change in the parent that we want to be, right? So we're not going to all of a sudden, if we stop unschooling, shift back to those power-based relationships. Like, those aren't an either or, that you're only that kind of parent when you're unschooling, right? Maybe unschooling introduced you to being that kind of parent, more engaged, trust, all that kind of stuff. But you don't have to shift out of that. That's you've grown into that person, that parent now, and you're going to stay there, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The other piece that stood out for me when I was thinking about that is part of that shift too, is seeing our children as real people. I think that's another big shift. You lose that age dynamic. Yeah. That I know better than you because, I'm an adult, whatever, right? And you see how capable children really are of having a conversation, of doing things, of learning about themselves, understanding themselves, adding to choices and conversations about what we might do as a family. And I think that's another piece that we don't lose. Even if you take the unschooling away, right? They are still capable. That's part of who we are now, is understanding that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of kids, let's shift to sibling relationships. That's another
Yeah,
thing we see questions about quite often, right? And how to help
yeah.
them move through that. And often we see them in unschooling circles. They come up because of unschooling, because, maybe now we're all home, et cetera. And we want to take an unschooling lens on them and not just go in and say, stop fighting or drag them away or whatever. But again, that's another thing that ultimately really isn't about the unschooling, is it?
Right. Because I think that dynamic of the sibling is so interesting because with unschooling, like you said, we're actually seeing those interactions. We're with them, we're together. And so if, say, you're not used to that, so say you're coming into unschooling after your kids have been in school, that can feel very intense because that has not necessarily been a huge part of your day-to-day life because, there's a much more limited time when you're together if you have school all day. And so it's new territory. And I think that, it's interesting when you think about how with school, kids are segregated by age. So often your siblings are going to have separate peer groups because of just kind of how that's designed. And so with unschooling, that really isn't the case. You have a lot of mixing of ages. You've got a common peer group, which can be great and cause problems, so it's like all of those things, work together. And with unschooling, we're living and exploring our life together, and it provides this really rich environment for creating these lasting, strong relationships. So I think while you can have that initial, whoa, what's happening? Why is this not working? Why are we fighting? Why are we whatever? I really looked at those as opportunities for growth, because here, what was important to me, and I've talked about this before, is I feel like this ability to be in relationship, to be in community, to do like, that's such a critical skill going forward. Like that's much more important to me personally than any kind of math fact or, history fact or whatever. It's that interpersonal piece. And so I love with unschooling, we're able to work on that, to be together, to give feedback, to facilitate, to have the time. It's always about the time, isn't it? We have the time to walk through these things. And so while the conflict can be uncomfortable, it's, I think it's such a great field to start. How can we work this out? How do we work with someone we're in conflict with? How do we, turn this around and look at it a different way? And in terms of the episode and what we're talking about, it isn't the unschooling. This is just learning relationships. Now, in a schooled situation, that can be happening at school, but without the facilitation, with some other things going on, with kids that maybe don't want to be there, and you have some different kind of conflicts because we hear a lot about bullying and just even difficult friend relationships and things like that. But what I love about unschooling is that we're there, we're present, we're facilitating. You have that closer dynamic with adults and children working together, and they're seeing you do it too. They're seeing you in relationship, and they're seeing you have conflicts and you figure that out. And so it isn't that if we took away the unschooling, we'd have no sibling conflict. We know that to be true,
Yeah.
but sometimes we feel that way, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think at the root of it, right, as we're coming to this around schooling, and I found that too. So, the kids came home and all of a sudden they were spending, lots more time together, right? So we did have a lot of focus on just sibling relationships and like I love that word, facilitate, and helping them work through them and figure out the tools and the ways to do that. And those are such a valuable skills. Those are life skills, really, right? To take forward no matter your age, whether you're school age or not. Those are really valuable skills, and I figured out so much of them as an adult because they were home there, right? I mean, before I was mostly in more formal relationships like school and work, and that was the bulk of it. So it was wonderful for me as well to figure out ways to help them and support them. And that was, like I said, the bulk of at least our first few months, when we were together, because that was the biggest change. All of a sudden we were all home and we were all together. Right. But yeah, it's a motivation. Unschooling was the motivation for that. Right. And the reason for it. But again, it's a bigger picture thing. right? It's something I fundamentally changed how I want to view relationships, how I want to be in relationship, how I want to help my kids in relationship. And again, right, if you pull the unschooling out of that, I would still want to do that. We'd be having the different conversations, right? If they had chosen to go to school, we'd be having conversations about those kinds of relationships, just as we had lots of conversations when my kids, chose to do activities or were online and had some sort of thing flare up, just just being in relationship in any aspect is something that we want to continue facilitating with them, right? And giving them tools that are more consensual rather than power based, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just a great environment for that to develop and to learn, different personalities and how do we deal with people that have different needs than we do, and how do we, and this is going to happen in any environment. But again, I think unschooling provides us the time. And so again, sometimes that can feel like, whoa, it's all bubbling up. Why is this happening? But no, you're just getting this beautiful time to work through these things that, like you said, sometimes can take us till we're 30, 40, 50
Yeah.
figure out these dynamics. And so how great that we can do it in the safety of our home with people that love us, to figure out these different nuances of our own personality, of understanding that people see the world differently. I think that's, one of my best friends, she's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, and I've talked about her before. But honestly, I swear it was not until we became friends, which was, we were probably in our late 30s, early 40s, years and years ago. No, earlier than that. But anyway, she didn't see that people saw the world differently than she did.
Yeah.
like until she really met me and we really started talking about nuances, because we like to talk about all these different nuances. She's like, what? and so I think, but our kids, I think, because we have that time together and to facilitate and to talk about, he really sees this differently. The park is not fun for him, but this he enjoys, and you really love this piece, but this. And so it's just all of this interesting human dynamic and information that I think is so wonderful. And so even though it can feel bumpy and challenging at times, it's just such a rich area for growth and development, like you said, for me and for them.
Yeah, no, I love that, because that's one of the huge pieces that we come to through unschooling, is that self-awareness, right?
Yes.
Like you said, through the time that we have, all that knowledge and understanding of each other, of people and human beings in general, isn't like sucked out of your head just if unschooling is no longer in the picture or something, right?
Right.
And I mean, one of the big reasons we're going through this is because it can get tangled up, right?
Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, I want to keep going before we get into that too much, because that's coming up. So now let's talk about issues around housework, like cleaning and chores and tidying up messes, toys all over the place, Lego. And these can come either from maybe stress that we're feeling about it because we're putting expectations and things on ourselves, or conflicts with our spouse or our partner who also have other expectations that maybe don't align with the way we're seeing things. And I think most of these challenges stem from us choosing to be with our children over time spent with the house, right? That being with our children and engaging with them and having all these conversations. And you know what? Maybe it's not always conversations, because some people, think, well, my kid doesn't like to talk about that stuff or whatever. But it's still about observing and noticing, and they notice these things, right? And maybe just sharing a quick something. Oh, hey, I noticed this, with your child, and maybe they put something together. But anyway, it really is a fundamental shift in our parenting priorities. So as we move to unschooling and we have that shift, it's so easy, I think, to conflate the two, right? To have them woven together, like this is because of the unschooling. But again, that's something, would that go away if we're no longer unschooling?
Right. And I think, we've seen this a lot with questions where the spouse who maybe isn't at home as much is really like, this is chaos, this unschooling's terrible, this is this and that. And really, so I think sometimes we can feel defensive about that. So first of all, breathe through that, because, they're just reacting to their own pieces too. So I think if we can just kind of help and calm everyone down, it helps us get there. But I think it's helpful to just kind of walk through, because, I have good friends that have kids in school, and holy smokes, I was staying at one of their houses one time. It was a couple years back. And it was the first time I think I'd stayed at someone's house who had kids going to school, and it was a school day. And we get up, and it was chaos. Okay. They have 3 girls, and, all different schools, and some drive and some don't, and some have to be taken and picked up and kids out the door. And do you have your lunch? And do you have that permission slip? And do you have that thing? And I was just like a deer in headlights standing against the wall going, this is crazy. And then, you add in homework, and you add in the stress of school, and, all these different pieces and all these different things. These relationship pieces are still happening that we talked about in the question before, but yet you don't have the time, to really dive into that. So I think there's a whole lifestyle associated with school that sometimes we don't think. It's just like, oh, well, they'll go to school because we think that's what you do. But there's all these other pieces that go along with that really make those issues just as complicated. And I think they also bring time pressure. And I think that time pressure increases stress. So while that spouse might be saying, oh, it's chaos and it's this, add the stress of that time pressure might not make anything better, And so I think if we can figure out, look at opportunities to, okay, what's happening? Are we feeling disconnected? What are the particular issues? Because sometimes it's just people have hot button issues from childhood about messes or whatever, or it's just, for me, and I've talked about it before, my mind is calmer when the space is clear, and so I would keep spaces for myself that were clear, because it would be a way for me to calm down. So looking at those underlying needs and doing that. But again, we've got the time to do that. We have the time to solve and dig in and peel back the layers, instead of being in kind of crisis survival mode with this time pressure that school can bring. So this is definitely another one where it isn't the unschooling. It's just an opportunity to figure out, like, what are our needs? What are the needs of my spouse and my kids and the house? And what do we need here?
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause I see it all the time too with families. Like, there's somebody I work with, and oh my gosh, always late in the morning, because trying to get 3 kids, again, 3 kids, 3 different schools, all the paraphernalia for school, having, to go back and take glasses to somebody, or somebody missed the bus, or, there's always things that go wrong. And if we don't take that moment, right, to think about, is this the unschooling?
Right.
We can so easily just kind of blame it and just say, oh, this is because we're unschooling, the house is a mess, or because we're unschooling, it feels chaos, or all of those things that can come up.
And I think it runs us in the wrong direction. So we're really not figuring out the problem. We're really not, peeling back the layers to understand how we can change. We're just putting this blame here. And if you have spouses that disagree, then you're just creating distance. No, I'm going to hold on to the unschooling. No, it's the unschooling, as opposed to, hey, let's dig under this, because,
right.
Part of this is just having a family and kids.
Yeah.
It brings some chaos, it brings some complications, but it also brings so much joy and wonder, to one's life. And so, yes, I think that just that, not running down that path to blame, but stepping back and connecting and figuring out, just really helps, because that running to blame, unschooling, again, I think it just takes us off course.
It does, exactly, because when that's where the blame is, the question is, the next question we obviously, often ask ourselves is, well, should they go to school? Right? And that's not, this is the whole point that we're saying, is that's probably not a solution that's going to fix
Right.
Right. And so, like you said, you're not looking at the people involved. You're not looking at what the root needs are. How can we, maybe adjust things, for that? As you were saying, you set up spaces for yourself in the house where you could go, once I've seen it called like periodic unschooling panic disorder or something, right?
Yeah.
And I really think it's because something in life has come up that's a
Right.
challenge, and we think of it as the unschooling, right?
Yeah.
Because it was something that came up as as a maybe result of our choice to unschool, but it's bigger than that, right? And when, like you said, when we start thinking about it as an unschooling thing, then the next thing is to question, well, should we be unschooling? Should the kids go to school? And
Right.
that sends you off in the wrong direction. You're spending all your time worried about and thinking about, should they be going? What, trying to think of what is it I love about unschooling? Why should we continue doing this? Those are all not questions that are going to literally help you with the particular situation you're finding yourself in that moment, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, what about bigger events? Okay. Like what I like about all these questions, at the root of it, it's the same thing, right? That we're talking about. Is it unschooling in that context of life? But I love the idea of thinking about all sorts of different things in our lives that can come up. So let's chat about medical emergencies, like big family events. Maybe there's something that comes up medically for a child, or moving. That's another big family event that we see questions about relatively often. Because chances are we have also made some unschooling inspired changes in how we approach these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, and I can really speak to both of these for a couple of things because, right, I think it changes our approach to so many things. That foundation of respect and trust, it's such an integral part of our lives. You can't really set that aside for decision-making process. It's not just about the decision-making process to go to the park or to do the class or the play date or the whatever it is. It really comes into play when you have moving, job changes, big things coming up. I mean, these are things that I think the triggered reaction, and this kind of came to me in the other question too. I think when we have a conflict or a panic or something that kind of stresses us, we revert back to kind of what we knew in childhood. And so I think that's why school comes up. I think that's why more authoritarian parenting may come up, some of these pieces, because it's just this panic and kind of primate kind of how do we deal with this? But I think when we can just breathe through that moment, that 90 seconds that I'll talk about, kind of breathe through that and look at, but no, how do we make decisions as a family? What have we cultivated here? Then we realize we want to all be talking about this. We made decisions about job changes and things like this when the kids were very little. And we all sat down like, here's what it might change. How do we feel about this? What's the priority? We can get more time with dad, but it would change a few things here. Here's what he's thinking. Here's how he feels about his job. Like, I thought these were such interesting, rich conversations for them to hear, even at that young age, because they were seeing how we made decisions, how we, like the things that we looked at when we were making decisions, and then they could tell us how they felt about that. So I found those to be such wonderful times for unschooling, like so grateful for those foundations that we had built, because we all felt comfortable, and we all, even when it was kind of okay, we're not sure and I'm not sure and we have different opinions, once we took that time and got to consensus, we all have buy-in. Then we all have, like, we made this choice together, and so then you make it work together. Because I think if you have a situation where a job changes and we're moving. Then on the other side of that, when there's conflicts to moving, and there's going to be conflicts with moving, and it's going to be stressful, period. I've done it a bunch of times recently. There's really no way to do it without that. If you don't have that buy-in, you have a lot more conflict. Whereas if you're all choosing to do it together, then you work together when the stumbling blocks happen. you help each other. And that's what I love about unschooling. And that's what I love about that environment. So that's kind of my piece about moving, but I do have a medical piece. But do you want to chime in about kind of those big moving job decisions first?
Yeah, no, what you said there made so much sense, because then you're back to, if you don't have that consensus or that, understanding together about why and the choice to
Wow.
do it, you're back to, when you hit a stumbling block, you're going to blame the moving.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right. And you're going to get back to arguing about the move, and I didn't want to move, and whatever, whatever. And again, that's not going to help you with that particular stumbling block, no matter what it
Nope.
is. Right. Right. And I mean, I remember we had been unschooling maybe a couple of years when we decided to move out of the suburbs, out of the city. And, and it was a shift for me, to have the kids involved and to, have those conversations where they had a say in it, because I was worried, what if they don't like anything that Rocco and I like, or vice versa, or
Right,
that it was another stage of me seeing how capable they were, even at those younger ages. They came with us to see properties. It took us a
right.
year to find a property that we were all, like, yeah, let's go for it. But it was so worth it. And they were so valuable in the process. And I would not have learned that or seen that if I hadn't, taken that step. Like, yeah, it was another natural step. We'd been living together like that for, a year and a half, maybe at this point, right? Those first 6 months were a lot of, a lot of me learning about unschooling, and then, and the bulk of the deschooling that first year and change anyway. But this was, like I said, something that hadn't come up before, right? So it was, okay, now I'm going to look at moving through the lens of unschooling, through the lens of the relationships that we've had. Am I going to now revert in this particular big family event to the more power-based dynamic where dad and I choose where we're moving and hope you're happy with it?
Right.
I mean, it was, and I learned so much through the process, and they were so valuable to it. And again, even if they were in school, I would now, always, I
Yes.
wouldn't remove that, right? I wouldn't take them out. I mean, and I have medical stuff too with Michael, and, sticking up for him and bringing him into the conversation while he was there. And, that was further along on our unschooling journey. So that was a lot easier for me in that particular case. It was actually just kind of fun at this point. Him and I were
Yeah.
just like, they don't even look at me. I'm the one in the hospital bed. They just keep looking at you. And I say, well, he's right there. Why don't we ask him? But anyway, yeah, you wanted to share too?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think, yeah, your story is so important, but that's really, with medical issues, body autonomy was just always very important to us, separate from medical issues, just every day, food, eating, going to the bathroom, sleeping, all of those things really were so important to me,
Yeah.
because I wanted them to listen inside to their bodies, because I had found at times when I wasn't doing that as a child or as a younger person, you know, it really takes a toll. So it was just so important to me for them to have the opportunity to really listen and tune into their bodies. And when it came to, a medical decision or crisis, be it around, teeth that needed something, or, some other kind of issue, we talked about it and made sure they felt comfortable. And again, you have that buy-in. And I think in your case, it's probably more important because there's ongoing pieces. So we have other friends who have issues that have medical issues that have ongoing pieces that need cooperation from the patient. And so having them buy in and understand the why, and you said that earlier, and I thought, gosh, maybe this is one of the most important points, is understanding the why. When we take the time to understand the why, then when you run into conflicts, you still can go back to, okay, but I remember why. I remember why we're doing this, as opposed to they're telling me to do this. I'm supposed to do this. I have to do this. It's so different when we all understand why we're making this decision to move or to do this medical intervention or to, take care of our teeth in a certain way or to, do whatever the thing might be. That why, taking that time for us all to understand that why is so, so important. And there's just another little aside related to the medical thing that it brought to mind an old story. It's something you'll hear when people are being some critical of like the way that, I parent. One of the things they would say to me is, yes, but what do you do if it's really emergency and you have to go right this second, or they have to cooperate. You don't have time to have this discussion or chit chat about, this kind of thing. Like I would get feedback like that from people. And I just thought, gosh, we just never really had that issue. And then this incident happened. We were at, the girls were pretty young. And we were at a friend's house and I got a call. My husband was on a trip and I got a call that he had been in a motorcycle accident. And, instantly it's like go time. Like I pull the girls over and I'm like, look, your dad's been in an accident. He's fine, but I need to go there right now. I need to get in the car and leave right now to get to him. Do you want to come with me? Do you want to stay with Christy? They took just a minute, not even a minute to go, okay, we want to stay with Christy. And I'm like, it's going to be a few hours. It's going to be a while. At this point, they were very young. We'd never really been apart for that long and whatever, but they sensed my sense of urgency and they just made a quick decision. It wasn't like, oh, I'm playing my game or doing whatever, like we might have if I'm going to the grocery store. They just got it. And they got it because I'm getting a little teary because it's like we have that connection to know, like we know. And when they come to me with something that's so important or adamant and like whatever, like I know and I can stop and I can connect with them and I can do it. And I don't think you can explain that type of relationship to somebody that doesn't have it, because I think it's just so different from what you see. They know that I don't ask them to do things arbitrarily. I don't make dramatic emergencies out of nothing. I need to go right now to the store. And if you don't listen to me, like that is not happening. And so when they saw that I needed this seriously, I need you to look at me. We need to figure this out. It was nothing instantly. And so I think it's important for people to understand that's what we're doing here. We're creating this foundation. We're building this level of trust so that we can be there for each other as a family. So, okay, that was an aside.
No, that was a wonderful example and a beautiful story and exactly it, right? I too haven't had that moment where, because life happens all the time. Things go wrong. But I have never had to resort to being a different kind of person or a different kind of parent just because of it, because we've developed that relationship with them, right? That trust, that connection, that we don't make up emergencies, right? We don't try to make things look worse than they are just to get them to do something, right? Because manipulate, there's the word, because we don't manipulate them. They know we're not trying to do it in this moment.
No.
So they understand right then and there. It's like, oh, okay, boom, as much as they can, of course, but of course, you're also understanding them in that moment too. Like you said to them, it's going to be a while because you understood that for them, this was going to be longer than usual. Than you'd been apart before, So we say things so that they understand because we know what they might find uncomfortable from it, right? And they're responding to where we are in that moment and the urgency of it. Like you said, this is all the foundation that we've built with them. And again, that's the bigger picture, right? That's life. That's unschooling is life, because even though we were motivated to build that kind of relationship with them through discovering unschooling and discovering, like that was one of the huge things when I was reading about unschooling at first, right? It's like, look at these wonderful relationships they talk about. That's the kind of relationships I want to have with my children. Unschooling was a lens through which I came to it.
Yeah.
But it's so much bigger than that, isn't it?
So much bigger.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you were to take the unschooling out of our lives, even at that time, I would still want that relationship. I would still want that connection, and we would still make decisions in that same way. And I just think that's important to realize, because again, they're connected, and yet, they're not.
And you were talking before, you've mentioned time a few times, right? Because it takes time to do these things. But even if school was in the picture, right behind it, that's what I would be spending my time doing, right?
Yes.
Cultivating that connection with them, working through things with them. At that point, I'd be working through things that came up at school, right?
Yeah.
And as I think back, though, that's what I was doing with a lot of my time when they were in school before I discovered homeschooling, right? I was spending all my time doing outside of work, me at work, them at school. That's what I was doing. And, it came down to that kind of choice. I actually left my job, my work, before I discovered homeschooling, because it was just taking up so much time.
Yeah.
Supporting them with school and all the stuff that came along with it. And I decided, that was more important than working, right? And then it was through having more time with them, working through that, researching and stuff, that I came across homeschooling in the first place. And I was already home, so hey, let's try. Anyway, that's a little bit of backstory. But yes, is whether or not school's in the picture, that is, as a parent, those are the choices that you can make. If this is the kind of relationship that you want to have, the investment of time in it is the cost, I guess. But it doesn't feel like a cost per se. It's a choice, right?
Right. And what I always say to people with things like that is, just like you just said, you're going to be investing energy in parenting no matter what, because you're going to be dealing with school issues or with whatever. It's always going to be something. But for me, it's, where do I want to spend that energy? And I'd rather spend that energy together, exploring the world, building relationships, all of that, as opposed to dealing with kind of outside issues that are being somewhat forced upon us by being in that school system. And again, it's totally different if a child makes a choice to be there, because again, they're feeling that sense of choice, and then you're able to operate in a completely different way. But I think it's, where do you want to spend your energy? And for me, I wanted to spend the energy together and at home and exploring the world together.
Yeah, no, I love that. Exactly. That's when choice comes in, right? And that's the bulk of our deschooling, is realizing how many things that we thought were have tos really are choices, right? So just to give it a little bit of summary, I think it's really helpful when challenges arise while we're unschooling to ask ourselves, is it the unschooling? Right? Because as we were talking about before, it's so easy to blame the unschooling, just because unschooling was the initial motivation to rethink all these choices about parenting, the parent we want to be, the life we want to have. The impetus is often the unschooling that has us realizing these are choices, not have tos that are on us. But now, when things come up, is it the unschooling? If you were to take away the unschooling, would my choice change in this situation? And so often it wouldn't, would it?
Exactly. And I think it's just taking that moment to pause when maybe things are flaring up and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this unschooling, and if we weren't doing this, it would be better. It's like, just take that moment and pause and step back and say, is that true? Is that really true? And walk through the different scenario, because I think you'll find, again, that it's not the unschooling, but that you have this opportunity in front of you to peel back some layers and to see what's going on, instead of getting derailed by this idea that it's the unschooling, or even the flip side, that it's just the school. If your kids are in school, it's not just the school, it's still relationships and figuring things out. And so kind of take that really high level, not the issue, off the table, and start digging in. And I think that you'll get there faster. You'll get there faster to solutions, faster to feeling better. Because I think, because unschooling is the new choice for you, this different choice, this different life choice compared to other people, that's where we first go to, boom, we go right there. This is the outlier. This is the different thing. But again, it's just what we find, when we're answering questions and talking to people, we start peeling back the layers. They suddenly have this aha moment, like, oh, okay, this is about maybe something from my childhood, or this is about this dynamic between my spouse and I that we can change. And oh, this is about something else. So there's always something else, it's just always, we've been doing this for, 20 years, like always it's something else. So just, if you can take that moment and pause and set that aside and then look at the situation for more clarity, I think, it'll just be much more productive in terms of getting to a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're talking there, you reminded me, that not only us jumping to it's the unschooling thing, when we, like, that's why I've talked on the podcast before, and you probably have too, about when you're out and about, with extended family or friends and things, I don't really talk about any challenges that we're having, because the answer is just going to be send them to school. And you can understand that, because from their perspective, that's the thing that's different, right? So we'll fix that first, and then we'll see how it goes, right? Then we'll see. Then we can relate to each other better. So you don't blame them for their answer. Well, send them to school. Your house is a mess. Well, send them to school. All these different things. And that's why I just never asked them or brought things up, because that was the answer that I was going to get. So why would I set us up, a friend or an extended family member, to give me advice that I was going to ignore anyway, right? It was gonna get me worried enough that I'd start questioning our unschooling, right? It would send me in directions I didn't want to go. So I would always remember, when I had those kinds of challenges, I would ask in unschooling circles, which is why we see all these kind of life questions in unschooling circles, because it's a different way of life. It's a different lifestyle, isn't it?
And that's what I was going to say is, take those questions to people that are really digging into those issues, because, and I said years ago when I was talking to people about attachment parenting and co-sleeping and extended breastfeeding and all of those things, same thing. Do not take your co-sleeping questions to the neighbor, because they're just going to be like, put them in a crib. But if you take that question to people that understand why you're choosing co-sleeping and how, and the benefits and what that can do, then they can give you that, oh, we just put a bolster at the side, or, oh, we did this to solve that problem, or, oh, this is how we addressed that particular piece. And then, you're talking to people in alignment with you. And again, that's not that you can't have conversations with other people about different things. But I think, and this came to mind from a question we had in the summit group, was when and this is related to spouses, when we take all of our fears about things and put them on our spouse, they want to fix it. They want to solve it. And sometimes the best that they know is like, okay, like you said, let's get back to conformity. Let's put them in school if you're, needing this or doing whatever. And they haven't thought through that any more than, you've thought through that. It's like what that would actually mean and look like. And so I think with something, when you're exploring and doing, take time to, I loved having friends that I could really talk about those nuances with, and really, okay, but here, what about this? And this is niggling, and what about that? And so that I could feel more confident and more assured, because my friends, while some of them, of course, want to solve the problems, a lot of them could just go through that with me. Whereas I feel like with a spouse, a lot of times they're just wanting you to feel good and wanting to solve the problem right away. And so I think it's a lot to put on someone that doesn't understand the situation, And so I think it's just kind of keep that in mind and find your support circles, and know that there are a lot of support circles out there for unschooling and all of these different pieces, and just keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. I think that's a big piece too, because, often we're the main unschooling parent. There's one focused unschooling parent, and then maybe one's working or whatever. The way your family is set up, whatever the family dynamic, and sometimes it's the dad that's staying home with the kids. Doesn't matter. So that's the person who has some time and who is motivated to learn more about unschooling, who is typically quite passionate about unschooling. But to expect that our partner or spouse is at that same level, or even, to wish they were at the same level.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, that would be nice. But how fair is that to put on someone else? We don't have to share all our same passions and interests. So to help them at the pace and the way they want to learn about it and ask questions about it, but they can see it in action. But if we're putting on them our doubts when they don't even
Understand
it or really understand how much we love it, like why they don't really understand why we're so darn passionate about it, on both sides. So yeah, that's such a great point, right?
Funny, because one of my kids, she tends to be a little bit look on the darker side kind of gal sometimes. And with a certain situation, she kept just telling me all the things that were bothering her about it and that she hated and didn't and this and that. And I thought, and we were putting a lot of energy into this particular situation and relationship that she's talking about. And I said, could you just tell me some things that we love? Can you just share those pieces alongside of the other? I'm not saying don't share the conflicts, but share those other pieces. And I think sometimes we can fall into that trap with our spouses and our closest friends because we just kind of assume they know the good stuff. And so we just give them the tough stuff. And then that can feel overwhelming to the receiver. Like, whoa, oh my gosh, it's problem after problem after problem after problem. But when I had that conversation with her, she rattled off 20 minutes of things that she loved about it and did. And I was like, okay, then we can spend time on this because, that feels good. And so maybe that's another message too, share the joy, share the good parts, share the inspiration, share the fun, because then you have that coupled with those sometimes stumbling blocks that we all run into. But not just that. So anyway, that may be important too. And it may resonate with somebody like, oh yeah, I might do that, because I think we all can kind of fall into that trap sometimes.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's such a great point. And I know for me at the beginning, after I had, we learn all these things through experience, right? So, it's happened to me and to us. And, as we were getting started figuring out how this worked. And for a while there, I had to not too much share what I was excited about, because the dynamic was still that he felt like I was trying to convince him. Right?
Okay.
So once you've gotten to the place where there's some push and pull there about the topic, so then I was able to I didn't share the negative stuff. I took that to people who I could, like you were saying, have that in-depth discussion about. And I didn't also seem like I was trying to convince him, although I felt I was just sharing all the cool stuff, right? It still had that power.
Yeah, be
kind
aware
of dynamic in it.
But
what you're doing is, okay, so I'm not saying it literally, but I'm showing it, right?
Yeah.
The kids are happy. We're doing these things. We're inviting him to play with us, all that kind of stuff too. You don't have to tell everything. You can show things too. And then he would start seeing things, and then he would mention, hey, la, 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 which may be something that I had talked about 2 months ago, but now it made sense to him because he saw it in action, right? There's so much when it's your own experience, and our spouse's partner's timetable is going to be different than ours. But then when he started seeing it, then I could start sharing it, right? Because he'd had the experience. So he could now understand how the experience I was sharing could have happened, right? That I wasn't seeing through rose-colored glasses or whatever.
Right, because they had that experience. I think that's really an important point. And I think that just the being and the showing is so critical, because I think when you're the spouse that's outside of the home, you're working and it's hard and you have your challenges and you're creating, helping to create this lifestyle for your family. I mean, you do want to feel that they're joyful and that they're happy and that this is a good thing, that we're creating this good thing, whether they be in school or unschooling. It's not about the unschooling. Yeah. It's about this dynamic of we're creating a family together. And so I think that that's really important. And so I just liked your point about that, to just show and to be a part of and let them know. So
yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so 2 little things. When issues come up, take that moment to ask yourself, is it the unschooling? Because that can help you more quickly get to the right path, right? Instead of bringing up the whole question, oh my gosh, should we be unschooling? Let's look at this particular situation and how we can work our way through that. And I wanted to end back on that Emerson quote again, right? Because I think unschooling has stretched our minds, right? Right? But it's stretched it in bigger ways. It's had us question so many things that aren't literally the unschooling, right?
Right.
So the mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions. I love that. Thanks so much, Anna, for the conversation. I had so much fun.
Yes. Take care.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.